If you'd like to talk about your own Bigfoot encounter, or if you're looking for help from a Bigfoot investigator in your area, email me at bigfootcrossroads@gmail.com. No Sasquatch were harmed in the recording of this podcast.
Well, my name is David Wilbanks. I have been investigating the Bigfoot mystery since the mid-1990s. I've been interested in this subject since I was a young child.
David, thank you for coming on to Bigfoot Crossroads and talking to me. How are you?
My pleasure. Yeah, I'm doing fine.
Man, I have known about you since I was just a wee lad in this community. If community is the right word anymore. I'm not sure it ever was.
Yeah, well, it depends on how loosely. It's a dysfunctional place, and it's on its best day, but it's got some good times too, you know.
Now, I think we've probably, both being Okies, we probably know a lot of the same people, but I don't think our paths have ever crossed before directly, maybe indirectly a time or two on the internet. I remember very early on, I got started in around 2000, whenever I finally got brave enough to start posting anyway, and you were already doing this.
Right.
What got you going into the field of Bigfoot research?
Well, ever since I was a little kid, I've been interested in, mysterious things, Bigfoot, UFOs. Back then, the Loch Ness Monster, which I don't think there's anything to that these days. But any mystery thing, I was really into, whether it's Bigfoot, ghosts, UFOs. But I love the woods, and ever since I was 13, 14 years old, I was going out in the woods camping, either, usually with a friend or two. And Bigfoot was just the most outdoorsy mystery I can think of, so I was just naturally drawn to it. But also a gentleman that my mother worked for back in the late 60s to early 70s, Dr. Lewis Stiles, he was a doctor of veterinary medicine. He had a book called by Roger Patterson, Do Abominable Snowmen of America Really Exist? And that book was over at his house, and every time we were over there, I was looking at that book. So, and I've actually got I've got an old copy of it now that, I still consider a treasured part of my collection of vintage Bigfoot books, But no, it's been something that I've always been interested in, and especially like Lewis, he had his when he sold his practice and went to work for the federal government as a federal veterinarian and moved down to Broken Bow, which is down McCurtain County. That's really the thick of it. So from the time I think they moved down there, I was about 6 years old, and so me and my family, we would go down there very often to spend time with them and with Lewis and his family. And I would always be traipsing around in the woods down there in McCurtain County every chance I got. I still do, I never outgrew that. I still love it. So, but yeah, I can't remember a time when I was really not interested in this subject. Matter of fact, I don't know how old you are, but well, if you started in this about 2000, we'd have to be pretty close to the same age, I guess. But when I was in grade school, we had book clubs. Did y'all have those like in school when you was a kid?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, so, we would get the list of the books that you could get, and man, if there was anything about Bigfoot or UFOs, Loch Ness Monster, any of that stuff, I would get that book, and I've still got some of those books from back then. I think the little book form of the mysterious monsters, I've got that, still in my collection. So yeah, I just ate that stuff up, and on one of my YouTube videos the other day, a childhood friend that I haven't heard from since we was probably junior high, and he lives in Germany now. Popped in. He said, "Don't let him fool you." He said, "I remember in the 7th grade we was going camping looking for Bigfoot."
Now, you've spent so much time in southeastern Oklahoma. People hands down will say, that's the Bigfoot mecca for Oklahoma. You spent way more time down there than I have. Are the stories true? I mean, are they just running thick down there?
They're not running thick, no. I mean, and a lot of the stories are true. But what we've seen happen in especially northern McCurtain County into LaFleur County is it's become a tourist attraction down there. They have the festival at Honubby every year, which by the way, I'm speaking at this year, first time.
Oh, wow.
And they have that. And realistically, if there's as many people show up in that little community as they say during that festival, I doubt there'll be a Bigfoot within a 20-mile radius of right there.
Yeah. They'd be rubbing elbows.
Where I go is not where most people go. What I like to do, I like to find places well off the beaten path, like, I'm not going to give away places, but like areas that you won't see anybody unless it's deer season, like maybe a wildlife management areas and such as that. I go to different ones of those. It's been a while, but that area, you hear people talk about Area X.
Yeah.
You've heard of that. I'm pretty sure that I'm like the first Bigfoot researcher to officially go down into that area. I talked to somebody there, a retired forestry worker down there at Honubby about, it was 1999, maybe 2000. I can't remember exactly, but I remember asking him, around here, if you wanted to go someplace that there would be the biggest chance of a Bigfoot being, where would you go? And it's not really called Area X. He said the name of the wildlife nature preserve that it is, actually. So I talked to a person in the community, and he led me down in there to look around. And shortly after that, I think maybe a night or two later, possibly, a fellow named Alton Higgins, he and I went down there once, I know. And then another gentleman, I can't remember if Roger Roberts went with us or not. Roger Roberts and I investigated another couple of sightings around the state with actually the BFRO at that time. I was never an official member of the BFRO, but I was briefly a contact for them. Now Roger and Alton, they were like official, if there is such, you want to use the word official. Right. They were, strong ties with the BFRO. I was just kind of the annoying kid that went with them a time or two. Well, I'm not a kid. I was in my probably late 20s or so by that time. Heck, I might have been in my early 30s. It's a long time ago, but they were quite a bit older than me. But me and Roger investigated a sighting right there on Big Eagle Creek, which is right by Octavia, of a fisherman, and that sighting came through the BFRO, and I was the first one to go there to look around. Roger, he was from up the Tulsa area. Or he was then. I'm sure he's retired now. I haven't spoken to him in years, but he was a private investigator by trade, and I went and looked around where this fisherman was fishing on that creek. He looked ahead of me, and he seen this, what he believed to be a sasquatch, from through the thick tree. You've been down there, so you know how thick the growth is down there. He's seen it from the waist down, stepping out of the creek in front of him, and he reported it to the BFRO at that time. And I said, sure, I'll go down there. And while I was making a grid of the area that he was at, which getting back there was an adventure on itself, because I didn't have a way. I didn't know what road would get to the area down the creek he was fishing. So I literally parked beside the bridge and hiked in on the west side of the creek. And man, how I did not get bitten by a cottonmouth, I have no idea, because I was wading through brush, just like stomping through it beside the creek. And I got to one part, and I had a backpack with plaster of Paris and stuff in it just in case I found a track, which I did, and I cast. But I remember one part I had to get in the water, take the backpack off, hold it above I looked like I was traipsing through the Amazon or something through this one deep hole of water.
Yeah.
And sure enough, a large cottonmouth swam right in front of me, but luckily I wasn't, he didn't pay me no mind, but it's sobering. But anyway, when I got down there, I was able to locate from description the area where he saw this creature step out. And actually the creek forked down there. One was on the east, it went to the east was the creek proper, but then there was a part that forked to the west a little bit that only had water in it, like when it was flooding. Mm-hmm. And it was in that I was doing a circular pattern around that area, and I found a place where that spillover part of the creek was, where there was mud, and I found where it had crossed through there, and it left tracks through the grass in this area, but you couldn't do anything to that. But it left me one print in mud, and I was there probably 3 or 4 days, 5 at the most, after he reported it, and it was still a feasible enough track to cast it and get the the general view of it out of it. But that turned into a pretty neat investigation there. Roger came down there. We spent a couple of nights down there. We didn't see anything or even hear anything at that point that I can remember. Now, a month or two after that, I returned to that same area with another associate, and we had something approaching our camp during the night. Actually, and we were camped between the fork where this creek kind of forked. We were in between that, and something was turning over rocks in the creeks and clacking them together and stuff like that. And it would approach just to the edge of camp where our lights could not quite view it. And then if we stepped toward where it was, it would retreat into the night. And some vocalizations and stuff, but I won't swear that they were a Bigfoot, but it was a peculiar night right there. And I wrote about a lot of these things in my book, Kiamichi Bigfoot. And if anybody listening would like to know more about some of the things that I've taken part in, I put quite a few things in that book, and it's available on Amazon on ebook or in paperback, and that's called Kiamichi Bigfoot, Investigating the Oklahoma Sasquatch. And that report that I just shared with you, I go a little more in depth on that. And one more case that I looked into, this one was really mind-blowing. I don't know if you're familiar with what they call the casino footage.
Absolutely, of course. Can't be a Bigfoot researcher from Oklahoma and not know about the casino video.
Well, I actually got to see that.
So really?
That was in that very brief time that I was associated with the BFRO. That report came through them, and I was contacted and by them and said, hey, you want to run over there to where this casino is and check out this report. Of course, this is a good, from where I'm sitting right now, probably a 3.5 hour drive maybe. And when they were telling me where it was at, I was talking to actually Matt on the phone there, and I'm like going, I don't think there would be anything to that. That's out there right on the prairie, you know. And he said, well, they say they've got it on a surveillance video. And I thought, well, that changes things entirely, you know. So I got my stuff together and I went up there, and I got there in the afternoon, met with a gentleman from the tribe there, and he showed me around. Later that evening, Roger Roberts, gentleman that I mentioned earlier, he arrived there. He had a friend of his with him, and I don't remember that gentleman's name. I really don't have any reason to, because he wasn't really a Bigfoot guy. He was just a friend of Roger's that came along. But he did come with us on the Eagle Creek investigation as well. But I can't remember his name. But anyway, Roger got there. So that evening, they let us in the casino into that room where they have the televisions that show the security footage, and they let us see what they had captured on video. And I mean, you've seen the night vision type surveillance video. It is kind of grainy. It's not, high def or anything like that, but it did show this creature stepping. And let me explain what the grease trap looks like. They look like a dumpster, but instead of the whole top raising up on it, it had a square, probably 2 foot by 2 foot lid on the top that you'd raise up, and they'd put the grease in it. And there was a little like a shorter street light that was right beside it, and it kind of came up and over and pointed down at this. And this creature stepped up to it and leaned over. What they showed us, we only seen a few seconds of it. If there was more video than that, I don't know. This is all that we were shown. And what you see at first is coming from, and this would be walking north to south toward this grease trap. And first thing you notice, it looked like a little light or a reflection. And looking back at it, I've seen interviews with Roger where he thinks it was eye shine. My impression was it was reflection of another street light off the top of its head. And that's neither here nor there. Whichever it was, that's still the first thing we noticed. And then as it got closer to the light, you could see the body kind of materialize into the light. When I say materialize, I'm not meaning like a supernatural thing. I mean, just coming into view,
right,
more completely in the light. And it was very tall and lanky. It wasn't like the, Patterson film object that was, kind of stocky like that. It was more, I've always compared it to like if you took a professional NBA player, how they're, very fit, but tall, lanky, and covered them with hair, then you would have that. Now, here's the thing. Because of where that light pole was, we were able to get an accurate measurement of how tall it was, because that lamp post was just right beside that grease trap, and we were able to determine that its height was over 9 feet tall.
Wow.
Between 9 and 10. We were always saying 9.5, but it walked in kind of that slightly stooping fashion, and the way it took the steps that we saw it take was reminiscent of like the Patterson film, that not really just stepping big upward steps like a human would, but more like a gliding fashion. And it just leaned over like to put its hands on top of the grease trap, and that was it. That's all we saw of it. But I remember looking at Roger and saying, I'll be darned, they are real. Up to that point, I was very interested in the subject and believed that with all the evidence there that it was most probably real. But seeing that, and especially when we went out and measured up the pole to determine how high it was, and I remember saying to Roger, that kind of rules out a guy in a monkey suit, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That was the first evidence like that I had seen that really, I just had that kind of a light bulb go off that like, well, these things are real. And really, I mean, who would, just the unlikelihood of the tribe there faking a Bigfoot video, behind the casino would just seem so unlikely, especially the fact that not long after that, people started making a nuisance out of themselves and kind of trespassing on the tribal land and having to be run off. People were coming in the casinos wanting to see that instead of spending money. And they just, what I understand, they just put a stop to it. But that was something, and it's another one of those things that's pretty much become urban legend. I mean, if I hadn't seen it myself, I'd think, yeah, of course, the video's not there anymore, another story. But I actually got to see it. So I feel very, very fortunate I'd say that.
To your understanding, what happened to the video? I've heard different stories.
Well, and there's a funny story there. I have no idea, but I suspect it's hard for me to think they would have destroyed it, but I suspect that it's kept under wraps there by the tribe because they didn't want that attention from it. They wanted us to look at it, I guess, to kind of give them an idea of what we thought. But it became kind of problematic with the trespassing and stuff like that after that, because that I mean, that's considered sovereign land. I mean, you know how it is. You live here. You know, you get on the tribal property. If they don't want you there, they can just tell you to leave. And one of them has passed away. The gentleman that I met there, I just learned from a friend of mine that actually her and her husband at the time went there one of those nights to investigate that patch of forest land out there. Her name's Shelley Harris.
Yeah, I know Shelley.
Okay. She could tell you about that too. And she could tell you a funny episode that happened on that bridge on the path out there. Anyway, but, yeah, she told me that the gentleman that I met to show me around there the first time has recently passed away. But Shelley, you know, she's been on my YouTube channel on the podcast and stuff. And, so we go way back, you know. So,
speaking of way back, both of you were part of a project back in the day that kind of put Oklahoma on the map for Bigfoot stuff, the Bigfootville documentary.
Yeah, now that's a neat story. That was back when I had the southernbigfoot.com website, and it started getting a lot of traction, more than I really wanted, you know, because I run a music store there, and especially after Bigfootville, my gosh, I got literally, you remember the old dial-up internet, right?
Yeah.
I got griped out by the local internet provider there. I'm trying to even call because I crashed their system just about. Wow. He said because I was getting such a load of people going to it, you know. But anyway, the Bigfootville thing came about because a gentleman out of England, his name was Bruce Burgess, and he's still around, by the way, still doing documentaries. I haven't spoke to him since back around that time, but I did say he was down in the Amazon doing some kind of documentary here recently. But he sent me an email, said, hey, I'm a documentary filmmaker and I want to do this. And of course, I thought it was a joke, you know, prank. And but then I like, well, check it out. You know, I checked him out. I was like, well, yeah, he really does. And I've actually watched a couple of his documentaries. So we chatted back and forth by email. And then he calls me up and I was like, yeah, that sounds like fun. So this is the funniest question. He asked me, he said, do you know any Native American?
No, sir.
I was like, Bruce, this is Oklahoma. I said, even I'm part Cherokee, you know. I said, if you got a family in Oklahoma that's been here for very many generations at all, you're going to have, it would be very odd that you wouldn't have any Native, you know, blood of some Native peoples. And he goes, no. He said, I mean like a more full blood, you know, that would have knowledge of their folklore and be willing to talk about it. And I was like, you know, I've got a friend here in Ada that, you know, customer at the music store and all that I've known for a good while. And he's a talker, you know, he likes to visit with people. And that, of course, was Tim Harjo, who sadly passed away last year.
Oh, man.
Complications of COVID. I talked to him about 2 weeks before he passed away, and we were sitting there in the shop talking about working on Bigfootville, and a particular joke he played on one of the cameramen. I'm going to tell you this before I forget it. And we were laughing about it. So the last time I was around Tim, we were having a laugh about this memory. One of the cameramen, his name was Martin, and he was not a very big guy. He was about my size exactly. Come up to Tim, he said, "Okay, if I really want to see a Bigfoot, what do I need to do?" And Tim said, "Well," he said, "the night before we go out," we were in Antlers at this point. And the next morning we were going to get up early and we were going to drive up into the lower Kiamichi Mountains there. Cause Tim, he knew a couple of places, that he wanted to take us to. So he tells Martin, he said, "Don't shower the night before. Don't use any shampoos or anything like that." And he said, "You want to wear a shirt made out of a tow sack," which, if anybody's listening just don't know what a tow sack is, that's a burlap bag that you would put like potatoes and other produce in. It was pretty good size. That's when they have the sack races. That's what they use.
Yeah.
I'm like going, where's he going to get that? Well, Tim actually just happened to have one with him.
Just so happened.
I don't know if this was completely premeditated or not. But so anyway, next morning it's like 5 o'clock. And we're all out in the parking lot of this motel there in Antlers. And, we're all down there getting camera stuff ready. And there's Martin. He's got his tote sack shirt on and all of that ready to go. And, the understanding was, Tim and his son Kanjat, which Kanjat's still around. I hope he hears this. He'll get a laugh out of it too. Was that they were going to be doing the same thing. So anyway, Tim and Kanjat come out of their motel room with all fresh clothes on, freshly showered, their hair still wet. And Martin, he just kind of looks over at me. And, of course, these guys are all English, right? Yeah. That English accent. He goes, "I've just been had, haven't I?" I was like, yeah. I said, "Honestly, I'm a little surprised you fell for it, but I've never heard Tim mention anything like that before." But, he was good-natured about it. He got a laugh at it like everybody. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. So anyway, Bruce, the first time he come down, he came to Oklahoma, met me at my music store, and I took like, I think at that point, maybe 3 days off. And we just did a tour. He wanted to meet some people. At that time down, he met with Tim there in Ada and talked to him about what he would like for Tim to do. And of course, Tim was just very willing to help out on his part. And he wanted me to introduce him to some people. And I told Bruce, I said, "Look, I know how TV shows can go, but I said, I just want a gentleman's agreement that if I introduce you to somebody, you will not deliberately try to make them look stupid." And he agreed, and I he lived up to that. He treated us well. So he came down, and we went for a long drive. We drove down to Broken Bow, met some people there. We drove all the way from the southeast corner of the state all the way to the northeast corner of the state there by Disney. Right at Grand Lake. And actually the last night he was here, Bruce and I made camp down in those river bottoms under the dam at Grand Lake, where a couple of police officers had a face-to-face encounter with the Bigfoot there. And while we were down there, about midnight or a little later, we heard a very distinct, loud wood knock down in those bottoms, not far from our camp. And he said, "Was that a wood knock?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, I actually might have heard a Bigfoot." I said, "You might have, Yeah. We didn't see anything, but I said that's a possibility." So anyway, he went back to England, and that was when I'd contacted Shelley. Now Shelley Harris, she was one of my investigators for the Southern Bigfoot project that I had, and talked to her and some other folks. Bruce went back to England, and then he came back in late November. It was just almost December, and we spent about a week doing all the filming. And we did some of the filming in Ada, a little bit there. We did one segment here in Hughes County, and then we drove down to Antlers, where we met with Tim Harjo and his son Kanjat, and shot that. And then we went to Broken Bow, where we met Dr. Lewis Stiles, which I mentioned at the first of this, is who kind of got me interested in it. And they interviewed him. And also at the end of the show, where you're seeing the native dancers as they're, dancing around a fire, that's on Lewis's property down there. And he had the Choctaw dancers from there in Broken Bow come and do that.
Oh, wow.
And so it was an exciting time. We left there, went up to, and that's where the interview with the game warden, Mike Virgin, was done down there. Then we left from there. We went up through Smithville. We rented the cabin on the mountain where the ice storm was. That was not far from Smithville. And then we eventually made our way all the way up to Disney, that's where we did the interview there at the camp with police officers that had that encounter. And then I think the last scene on there is actually at Wewoka, Oklahoma, and that's where Tim Harjo is sitting at a fire with a Seminole tribal elder. I can't remember his name. Anyway, I didn't really know him. That was an acquaintance of Tim, where they were sitting around the fire, and I document all that in my book as well. But yeah, it was an exciting time.
It was an extremely popular documentary.
Yeah, if I'd known it was going to be that way and wasn't just such a kid at the time, I would have asked for more money or something.
Yeah, it got lots and lots of replay over the years, and
yeah, they still play it once in a while.
What you were saying about the gentleman's agreement you had with him, that was one of the things that I believe myself and a lot of people that were involved in Bigfoot research were actually happy with, is they didn't make fun of you guys or paint you guys out to be stupid idiots or anything like normally happens with Bigfoot documentaries.
Right. And here's the deal. Bruce knew. I told him, I said, if that stuff starts to go down, if you try anything like that, I said, I will leave. I said, I'll walk right off the set and I'll go home. And of course, he just laughed. He goes, "Oh, you don't have to," he said, "Dave, you don't have to worry about any of that." And he didn't. The only part of that show that I wish that he did not do is, and I have spent the last 20 years, it's been 20 years since we shot that. It aired in 2003, but we shot all of that footage in late November 2001.
Mm-hmm.
But the only thing in that show that I wish that he hadn't done is when we're with the police officer, which was Dan Belda, which became a friend of mine. And Dan actually became one of my investigators in the Southern Bigfoot project that we did. I only had two. Shelley was one, Dan was the other. And very sadly, Dan is deceased now, which you might have already knew that. But the part of that show where Dan shoots his weapon into the woods.
Right. The way that it was edited. Yeah.
Way it was edited. And I have spent the last 20 years explaining to people Dan was not shooting at anything. There is a berm in the woods there. There's a big dirt mound down there that he was shooting into. It was edited where it kind of looked like that people were afraid that the marauding Sasquatch was going to come down the hill and he was scaring it off or shooting at it, which was not the case. See, when him and Jeff, I believe his last name is Whitfield, if I remember right, which that's the only time I ever seen Jeff. That's because Jeff acted scared on that show.
Yeah,
he really was. That was not scripted. Jeff was very uneasy to be back down there because they had a face-to-face encounter, and I'm talking literally face-to-face encounter with this creature down there. And the first time I went down there, that Dan led me down there. That first time, Dan would not stay till dark. Now, he would come back with me several times after that, but that first night he was uneasy too. But what they had been target shooting earlier in the evening of when they had their encounter with this creature, and Bruce just asked Dan. He said, "Well, you were target practicing." He said, "Would you kind of demonstrate that?" And Dan said, "Sure." And he fired a couple of rounds into the dirt mound there, and that's what you see there. And it was, edited for effect, I'm sure. But out of the whole documentary, that is the only thing that if I was talking to Bruce today, I'd say, man, I had a great time, but I really wish you hadn't done that.
Yeah, they could have put a little caption there or something.
Disclaimer.
Yeah. Over the years, I have heard people asking about, why are the Bigfoot more violent in Oklahoma? And you hear these horror stories about the violent Bigfoot in Oklahoma, but I have yet to experience that for myself. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, obviously on a creature of that size, power, stealth ability that it has, the potential is there. So I'm not going to just say they're harmless. However, just because somebody reports a violent encounter does not mean a violent encounter happened. I mean, there are people that make things up. I'm sure you know that. But historically, the violent encounters that I'm familiar with, even going way back to Ape Canyon or to the story of Bauman that Teddy Roosevelt told, where people were attacked and one even killed, those encounters that went badly were preceded by a person either shooting or shooting at one of these creatures. Now, as well as I do, you shoot a big grizzly bear or something, you better take it down because it's probably going to come for you.
Right.
So these creatures are obviously much more intelligent than a bear. I don't believe they're just the remnant of a previously thought extinct ape called Gigantopithecus. I don't believe that, and I don't mean any disrespect toward anybody that does have that frame of mind, because honestly, we don't know what they are. We've got different thoughts and theories of it, and I do my best to be respectful of all of that. But I'm of the feeling that if they were just an ape, we would have found them a long time ago and know right where they are, because that's the way it is literally with every other species of ape that's out there that we come in contact with. As far as violent, like I say, I've spent a lot of time in the woods. The closest to a violent encounter that I had was back in 2003. A good friend of mine named Brian Baker were camping down in the Kiamichi Mountains at an area where a man who was riding horseback down there by himself on one of these mountain trails saw one walk out in the trail in front of him, about 50 yards ahead of him, see him, and then run back into the woods. So me and Brian, we went down into that area the next spring. This would have been the summertime when this man had this encounter. I had already been there a time or two myself, not seen anything. But me and Brian went there, I believe it's March 17. I've got the date scratched into the footprint cast we made. I believe it's March 15 or March 17. I'd have to go get it. But anyway, I like to fish and catch our dinner, fry fish there in a skillet on a campfire. Just seems to taste better that way,
Usually, yeah.
Yeah, it's done right, as long as you don't drop it in the dirt. But when we were walking along the creek fishing in the thick, and again, you know how thick the underbrush is there. If it's right next to the creek, you can't see very far into it generally, and that was the case here. But something was pacing us, if I'm guessing, maybe 30 foot within the tree line, and a lot of thick underbrush, and it would once in a while make a whistle type, and not like a person would normally whistle it. The best I can describe it, and I've been trying to put my handle on it, and I mentioned this, I interviewed Ron Moorhead, who has the Sierra Sounds, who recorded those. He was on my podcast Tuesday night, and I was saying, it doesn't sound like it comes from the lips, and Ron was like, no, it comes from the chest and over the teeth, is what he thought. And I said, well, that would make sense. But kind of like a tea kettle, as it starts to build up pressure and starts to starts to whistle like that, but not as high pitched. But we was hearing that a couple of times. You know, we had no reason to think, hey, that's a Bigfoot, but we did, you know, make the comment that, well, I wonder if that's a Bigfoot. Of course, we never did see it. Now, late that night, and it was misting rain off and on there. We had not a tent. I generally don't like to sleep in a tent unless it's just blithering cold or something. Generally, I'll put a tarp between a couple of trees to keep the moisture off if it's drizzling. So we had a cot set up, and after midnight, I believe it was around 2:00 in the morning, we were awakened by a very loud crash boom. And of course, we get up and look, and just about 20 foot outside of our camp, something had thrown a large rock, when I say large, 25 or 30 pounds, with a lot of force against this big tree outside of our camp. And you could see where it had hit the bark of that tree and made a dent in it and landed right under it.
Wow.
So I've heard some people say, well, that was aggression. I said, no, aggression would have been lugging that rock right on top of us.
Yeah.
You know, my impression was it was letting us know it was there and would rather us not be. You know, of course, we didn't leave. We stayed there, but we did not go to sleep that night. We built campfire up, and we you know, were quite amazed by it. Now, the next morning, we started circling the camp looking, and found in the pine needles on the side of camp that rock would have been thrown from, a line of what looked like indentions from a bipedal, you know, like human walking. Mm-hmm. And there was a mud hole in the road there, and I could see in the mud, you know, disappearing into it, there looked like a heel print that was kind of visible just on the outside of it. And I said, that looks like a heel print. And of course, we're like going, yeah, but it's the rest of it's in the water. How can you tell? So I got innovative. I've got pictures of this process in my book, Kiamichi Bigfoot. So if you want to see this, then what I did, I thought, you know, we got a couple of rolls of paper towels here. I estimated where that footprint would be, and I, using sticks and rocks, built a little dam in this mud puddle around where I thought it would be. And then I took pieces of paper towel, laid them gently into that area until we had soaked all of the water out of that. And sure enough, there was a print under that, and we made a cast of it.
Oh, wow.
Which I've got. Now, it's not huge. It's only about 12 inches long, but it's that wide, flat, typical sasquatch, you know, type print, you know. Mm-hmm. But anyway, we got that. It made a pretty good cast. And there's, like I said, there's pictures of the dam around the print, and then the picture of the cast afterward. Now, since that time, I've been going back to this area every year since 2003, and I've had some very, very interesting things happen. I was there the last weekend in July, and I shot some really good footage. If you go to my Facebook page, I've got a short video of a cottonmouth striking at the lens of my GoPro, and even in slow motion there, and it'll take you to, I've got 2 YouTube channels. I've got one YouTube channel, doesn't have much on it, but it's just called Dave's Outdoor Channel, which I love reptiles, you know, like snakes, and I've got some like educational type videos of that on there. But it has that cottonmouth, and I've been doing that all afternoon. I didn't find any tracks. Of course, it's been bone dry here. But that evening, I just had this feeling that something was watching me. And it was very ominous feeling, like it wasn't a friendly feeling. And I left that place and went to the lower camp, and eventually didn't stay the entire night. I didn't see anything, but I do trust, over the years, I learned to trust my senses on something like that. Mm-hmm. And it just didn't feel right. And later that evening, that night I did go home, but I really wasn't prepared to camp anyway, because so dry. I was not about to start a campfire down in there.
Right.
But I did spend all day in that area and then up into the night. But as far as evidence, I didn't not find any what I would call evidence at that time. Of course, it would have had to have been massively huge to leave a footprint in the dirt that was down there at this time. But the biggest footprint evidence that I've ever found down there, and this was 2 or 3 years ago, me and, again, my friend Brian Baker, which he's about as elusive as the Sasquatch, because he doesn't like town and stuff, and he only comes to town if he has to, type deal, to work, or whatever. But he and I found a print that measured 17 inches down there crossing the road, and I'm like, and it was in the fall, and there was a tire track going through there, and this thing had stepped right in that tire track. And left that. And of course, that was all it left. I mean, there were other impressions off the road, but you get into the pine needles and stuff, that's all you get is impressions.
Right.
But and this wasn't great, but we were able to measure that, and I'm like, oh man, just how big of a creature would have left a 17-inch track? That would have been something massive.
Pretty big one.
Yeah. Something that if you run into it, you hope it's in a really good mood.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I've the longest chapter in my book deals with my first going to that area and up until last year. So it's the longest chapter in there.
Has there been any moments that have just kind of given you the willies?
That I've been terrified or anything?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, I got the willies week before last when I was down there. But as far as just absolute terror or something like that, no, I've never experienced anything like that. There have been things that put me on guard, but I do a lot of solo camping down there in the Kiamichis, and when you're by yourself out like that in a really remote area, you're just, I mean, if you got a brain at all, you're going to be extra cautious. Not necessarily with Bigfoot. I mean, like a criminal element, if they come down to where you're at. I did have that happen one time. I had a pickup with 3 obvious meth heads pull up outside of one of my camps down there one time, and they didn't get out or nothing. They just sat there and stared at me. And of course, I was armed. The position I was in down there getting my fire ready, they couldn't see that, but I thought, well, I wonder what they're up to. So I stood up and started walking toward them. They saw that I had a sidearm, and it was basically what I had on me was my duty weapon. I was a reserve police officer at the time. And when they saw that, they backed up and decided to go somewhere else, which was good. Another thing, snake bite, you get snake bit. If you're out there like that, you could be in big trouble. If it's a copperhead, it's going to hurt, but I'm going to drive to town and I might go to the doctor if it's copperhead. Probably not. If it's a rattlesnake or a cottonmouth that bites you, you could be in some serious trouble. So when I'm out by myself, I walk slower, very cautious where I put my feet and stuff. And you're your own rescue out there. You fall into something, break a leg or something, you can be in trouble. But anytime I do a solo camp, I tell both my kids, which they're both grown up, I tell them, I said, look, this is the area that I'm going into. I'm going to drive back this far into there. I said, if I'm not back by this day, come look for me. So I always, make sure somebody knows where I'm at. Now, when I've got a friend that's available to go along with me, that I trust, to not give away my locations and stuff that I like to go to, I'll take somebody along. But if they're not available, I don't miss a opportunity to go and camp,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not generally a real jumpy person, but I do trust my my gut on something like that. If something just absolutely does not feel right, then I will listen to that inner voice.
Do you think that is just something instinctual, or, I'm sure you're familiar with this. People who've spent time chasing after these things talk about hitting that wall or the atmosphere around them just suddenly changing.
And I actually agree with that. And Ron Moorhead was talking about that with me the other day. And I mean, some people say, is it infrasound? I mean, that may sound like something out of the woo. I've heard people call it, but really it's not. I mean, we have animals that do that. I mean, tigers do that,
right?
To stun their prey. We know that our government's even experimented with it from a military type capacity. So is that what it is? It could well be. But yeah, that just atmospheric change you're talking about, that's a good way to put what I felt the week before last. It just felt like the feeling I used. I was telling somebody about it. I said it just suddenly felt heavy.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is it something called infrasound, or is it which is very possible, because we know scientifically that is a real thing. That doesn't fall into anything paranormal.
Right.
And one thing that I've said at other times, and this may well be too, that could be an instinct that is a holdover within us from a time in our distant past where we were not nearly as high on the food chain as we are now.
Right.
It could be that.
I would agree with that. I definitely think there's something to that.
Yeah, and I think, and it could be a combination. I don't know. I'm not going to throw discredit at any of that, but definitely there have been, not often. The one last week before last, that was, it felt very different that time. Now Ron, he talked about a time down there in that Sierra camp where him and this friend that was with him literally felt like they just hit a wall. They couldn't go any further then.
Mm-hmm.
Now, was that due to sound? And of course, somebody had mentioned to him a pheromone, and I'm like, well, the thing is, a pheromone in the animal kingdom is usually directed at their own species,
right? Having
to do with eating or something like that. So what would we care about what a Bigfoot's pheromone was? I'm not planning on dating one or anything.
Right.
So
they're usually used for mating purposes, if I understand correctly.
Right. And that's something. This is another thing that I've mentioned. I mentioned it to Ron. I mentioned it to other people. And again, I don't mean this to discredit or disrespect anybody that tries this, because we're all looking at this mystery. Some of us from different approach than others, but that's fine. There are some people will take like pheromones of a great ape, whether it's a chimpanzee, gorilla, or whatever, into the woods with them on something and hang it in a tree. My question was that, and somebody that's an anthropologist, maybe they could set me straight on this, but why would a Bigfoot be sexually attracted to the pheromones of a chimpanzee?
Right.
Or an orangutan? Because the pheromones of a white-tailed deer, to my knowledge, does not attract an elk.
Right.
So if I'm wrong on that, tell me, and I will gladly accept that. But I just don't, to me, a pheromone would be species-specific and would be an attractant to that species. Because obviously, if a chimpanzee's wanting to mate, he doesn't want to attract a mountain gorilla.
Right. It makes a lot of sense.
Anyway, that's just my thoughts on that.
Yeah. There might be the possibility that we, for some reason, react to it, even though we don't detect it. But at that point, you're just basically throwing things at the wall.
And true. And like I said earlier, and I want to be very clear, I'm not ridiculing or discounting any of that.
No,
I mean,
no.
yeah, try it. I mean, they're trying different things. You know, we all try different things, whether it's knocking on the tree and see if we get an answer, or clacking a rock together, letting out a whoop into the night. I mean, people try different things, and I don't think we ought to ridicule anybody for you know, taking a shot at it. Not literally a shot with a gun, but I mean, you know, just different techniques, because we don't know. But here's one thing that's very consistent. Generally, we don't find them, they find us.
Right.
Because most of the sightings, and the ones that I consider credible, which I received a lot of them, are purely by accident. Like the person is there going about their business, camping, fishing, or whatever, and for whatever reason, catch a glimpse of this hairy ape-like humanoid watching them from the woods, and 99% of the time, if not even a higher percentage than that, 99 point something, when that Bigfoot realizes it's been seen, it goes the other direction. And even the face-to-face encounters that I've interviewed people, when they're found, even face-to-face, they generally don't stick around. You know, I have had one visual sighting in all my years. I've had one visual sighting, and it only lasted a couple of seconds, and it was summer before last. And I just caught a glimpse of it across the creek from me. First thought was, just out of the corner of my eye, I was getting to a campsite and was getting my stuff out of my truck, going to get things ready. Something caught the corner of my eye from across the creek. My first thought in my mind was a burnt tree stump or something. Then I turned and looked straight at it, and as soon as my eyes locked on it, it shot off through the woods. And it was not very big. It was between 4 and 5 feet tall. Its hair was kind of a grayish black, and I could not make out facial features, but the face itself was very dark as well. But literally, as soon as my eyes locked on it, it shot off into the woods, and it did not make any sound at all when it took off.
And you had spent all those years in those woods.
Yeah.
You're there looking for these things. I'm assuming.
Well, but this particular time, I had just got there, and I was getting there late. It was getting very close to dark, and I guess just getting there at the right time. It was just observing me from right at the edge of the real thick brush across, right at the edge of it, and then it was gone. As soon as my eyes locked on it, it was gone. It just went. And I was like going, well, and it wasn't a big one. Couldn't even really call it a Bigfoot because it wasn't very big, you know. And, you know, people say, well, it was a juvenile. But somebody else brought up the point where I was talking to him. He said, you know, we're really just assuming one of smaller stature is a juvenile, and brought up the point, how do we actually know that? How do we know there's just one particular type of them out there? And, you know, we really don't. There are just so many things that are a mystery. Now, again, this leans to me saying I do not believe they're just an undiscovered ape. I think, one, they've got to be extremely intelligent to avoid us and avoid capture or being killed and brought in over these years. And I've got this hunch that they're smart enough to know that humans are bad news, because we have as a species, a bad habit of destroying and exploiting and all manner of bad things that we get our hands on. I'm not talking everybody individual, as a species, and I don't think anybody can argue with that. But these beings seem to be smart enough to know that close contact with us is not to their best interest. Now, in the past, and I know the native tribes have had a lot more intimate contact with them, but they tend to have a lot more respect for the natural world around them than what we all ought to. Especially, I think they would have to be at least closely related to us. And I use this example for that. If, and I put an if on this, if these stories that come out of the Pacific Northwest of an occasional male Sasquatch abducting a human, a native girl, and even producing an offspring with them are true, then these beings would have to be very, very closely related to us to be able to do that.
Closer than anything else on the planet.
Absolutely. They would have to be, I would have to say, in the genus Homo, maybe not Homo sapien or Homo sapiens sapien like us, but I mean, in this genus, we know that we can cross, take Neanderthal, Homo neanderthalensis. We know we've crossed with them in the past. Neanderthal did not become extinct. I mean, if you're of European or even some Asian descent, you have Neanderthal DNA. So
what's your take on the claims of paranormal or supernatural abilities with these creatures?
I don't know. I have not experienced anything like seeing one disappear into thin air or into a portal or something like that myself. I've had reports that have things happen or are reported, like a lot of it's electrical type anomalies, where somebody's car batteries or something or car lights are going dim in the presence of one of these beings and stuff. I know the guy that has the Live Wire YouTube channel, Mark Copeland, had a lot of like camera malfunctions and other things happening on his place, seeing orbs in relation to the Sasquatch stuff. Now, I did have one strange occurrence like that, but I can't say this was not just a malfunction in the vehicle. But while we were investigating the casino footage out there, I had my then wife and kids, who were very young at the time, had went up with me one time. We were parked in that wooded area there listening, and we could hear something heavy walking through the woods, and the electric locks on the SUV we were in just started locking and unlocking real quick. They did it several times, like almost machine gun quick. Now, was that a coincidence that there was a little malfunction there somewhere with the vehicle that just happened to take place the same time that this large something was moving in the woods, or was it related? I don't know, and I'm not going to make any claims that it was. All that I can say is we were there investigating sightings that were going on at that time. We could hear something large in the woods, and there was that malfunction of the light or the locks on the vehicle that happened at the same time. And there were multiple witnesses to that being me, the lady that was my wife at that time, and my son, who was old enough to remember it, that were there. Now, coincidence or related, I don't know. Now, anything actually supernatural, I can't say. I have taken reports, and the one thing that people that report some odd thing like that tend to say to me is, now, when they get to that part, say, I don't know if I even ought to mention this part. And I said, no, if it happened, you need to mention it, because if it's an honest investigation, I need to take into account everything you experienced.
Mm-hmm. My question was always, well, why don't you hear more reports of these abilities or these things happening? Why are they so few and far between? And people have said that certain organizations, I won't mention any specific names, would withhold these reports from their databases in the past. Have you ever heard of anything like that happening?
Withholding from their database?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And I won't mention any names there either. But yeah, if you go back to, and you'll remember this, you go back to like 2000, even the mid to late 90s and early 2000s, some of your websites on that, if it wasn't something that went along with the previously thought extinct ape living over here, remnant of Gigantopithecus, they really didn't want to give credit to anything outside of that.
Yeah.
And you probably remember that. I mean, I know we're both thinking about probably the same organization, and
yeah.
I'm not going to put down. Hey, I look at it this way: they build their organization, they can investigate what aspect of it they want to, and more power to them.
Right.
But yeah, to your answer, and I'm not going to be critical of anybody like that, but to me, and like I said, I was a police officer in my town for like 13 years. I mean, I was a part-time guy, but you do see some things, and what you learn how to talk to people. Can you imagine if a police officer showed up to your house where you had some break-in, domestic disturbance, whatever, and the officer is filling out the report or taking your information, and you get to one part of it, and that officer says, "No, I don't believe in that stuff. We're not going to put that in the report."
Right.
I mean, could you imagine that? I mean, that would not be an honest investigator, would it?
No, not at all.
So if I was taking somebody's report and they said, "Yeah, this sasquatch, I saw him at the edge of my property. He was there in the woods." Yeah. And then I saw these 3 orbs in the woods behind him. And I said, okay, we're going to leave that part out because I don't believe in that stuff.
Right.
I've just lost all credibility as an investigator. So what is the possibilities there? And this is not a real scenario that I'm putting out. This is just for instance. So if I believe the person that says he saw the Sasquatch and the person also saw these orbs, what does the question become? It becomes, okay, I believe the guy saw something, and his description of the Sasquatch is enough so that I believe that's exactly what he thought. But what were these orbs of light? Were they lights from a neighbor's, maybe with flashlights that were coming through the woods? Was it some kind of atmospheric deviation or phenomenon? The question then would become, if I believe is credible and actually seen these things, is not if he saw these things, but what are they?
Right.
So there's the mystery right there. Now, Bigfoot, I've looked into that a long time. I know what a Bigfoot looks like. I know what their general behavior that people report is. The orbs thing, I don't know what that is. But I was talking to, I've got a friend who is of Comanche heritage, and him and his mother will come in the store sometime and talk to me. They've talked to me about some of their folklore and stuff. And you've heard legend of like what they call the little people.
Right.
All your tribes have some legend about that. But the lady was telling me that some people, when the little people were around, could actually see the little people, but the ones that could not see the little people would see a small glowing orb of light.
Huh.
So I'm like, and that's the first I'd ever heard of that. Of course, I've never looked into the little people legends and such, but I had never heard of that. So the thing about orbs is not a new thing. That's things that have been reported a long time.
Right.
What are they? I have no idea.
I'm with you.
There are people that I deem credible, that are not looking for attention, that have just talked to me, that didn't want their report put out, that said, "Hey, I saw this orb thing. What does that mean?" I said, "I have no idea." I've had people, I did a book signing at the Bigfoot Museum in Tallahena. And by the way, I'm going to give a shout out there. If any of you guys are ever down in Tallahena, stop at the Bigfoot, the Chute Ranch Project and Bigfoot Museum there in Tallahena, and visit with Tanya Kordek and her husband Chuck there. They've got a nice little place there. But anyway, that's my shout out to Tanya and Chuck. But I was doing a book signing there, and a gentleman walked up, and he had from one of the security cameras on the front of his house, video of an orb making its way across the yard out there. So I have no idea what they are. I have no idea. And it could be just a totally natural phenomenon, but I don't know.
Have you had any reports of what people are calling the dog man?
Yeah. I've got a couple. I mean, they're not, I think most people that are going to report a dog man type thing go to there's a lot of YouTube channels and organizations that kind of focus on that. And those folks will usually bypass me because I'm not really out looking for it. But I have received a couple of reports. And one of them I did a video of where I share the individual's account of it. And I do receive reports of other types of cryptids. And there's one, and I don't know what this is, but both of these sightings of these creatures were by different people within a 10-mile radius of each other. And one of them was not, as the crow flies, about 2 miles from where I'm sitting right now. And I believe these people because they were out, their dog was acting up, and a whitish glowing humanoid figure jumped out of the brush and took off running deeper into the woods. And I was like, what? He goes, he says, I don't know. He says like ET or some kind of ET type thing, And I thought, well, that's strange. But earlier than that, like about, 15 or more years ago, the one that I just mentioned happened probably about 10 years ago, about 5 years or so before that. You go a little further north, a couple that were out in the woods actually saw something that sounds like the same thing in this other area. And I've actually did a live from the field show from the same valley down there that where this creature was reported. And I have no idea. That's something that if I'd have just heard the one, I may not give much thought to it, but you get two reports from different individuals that, to my knowledge, don't know each other and are definitely not even in the same age group of people, reporting a very similar, smallish humanoid glowing figure in the woods. I don't even know if that's a cryptid or an alien or something. I don't know, but that's something I've got reports of. I've got a report of a couple from actually up in your neck of the woods, pretty close, I believe, of kind of a pixelated, blurry type figure out in the woods, and don't know what to make of that. And I'm just mentioning these as other unknown things that people have contacted me about.
Right.
And you can find them on my YouTube channel, Bigfoot and More. If you look through it, most of my stuff is Bigfoot related, but I put the more on the other end of it. So if I wanted to make a video about something else, I would too. And I do. Some of them's, just hiking videos,
Yeah. What do you have any future projects coming up? Any new books that you're working on, or special video series or anything?
Well, videos, I do them as I have an opportunity. My friend Cornell Hanratty from Massachusetts, he has a YouTube channel called the No Such Thing Podcast. He's been down here a couple of times, and taken him and my son into the woods to look around and stuff. We've had the last time he was down here, we had a very exciting time, if you will. We experienced vocalizations, which he actually captured some of those vocalizations on a recording device he put out in the woods. And some of those that we didn't hear at the time, and he discovered them when he got back home. And he would leave this recording device. It was a Zoom. He could tell you what model it was, but I mean, he had put in about 50 yards or so in the woods from our camp and just turned it on, left it recording. And he picked up a very loud whoop that whatever made it had to be standing just almost on that recorder out there he had hid. Wow. And we did not hear that whoop. And it could have been I guess a human could have made it. It wasn't, it was just what you hear people talk about hearing a whoop, but we were way the heck back in there. So nobody could have drove to where we were at or even close to us without us hearing them clacking through the rocks and spinning dirt and everything, just trying to get there. But what we did hear was that second night there, especially, we heard some distant stuff the first night. The second night, up the ridge from us where we were camping, we were about halfway between this boulder field that went up the side of the mountain. And then there were some creek bottoms below us to the, this would have been the east. And then just to the north, it dropped straight down to a creek. So we heard a very definitive wood knock from up the ridge from us. A few minutes later, it was answered down in the creek bottomland down there. And then a little bit later than that, something was clacking rocks together a few times down in the creek. So our impression was like, man, whatever's out there, there's three of them. And late that night, I told you I don't like to sleep in a tent, but it was in March and it was cold. So me and my son were sharing a tent. Cornell had a tent of his own, and he had it snugged up to the edge of this boulder field. And of course, I was tired. We were all tired. We'd spent the 2 days just solid hiking and filming and such as that. But that second night, after midnight, Cornell woke us up. He was yelling. He said, Dave, there's something by my tent. And of course, I got up and got out of the tent pretty quick, and whatever had been there was gone. And I was thinking, my first thought was, and he says, no, it was walking like a person like a very heavy person, like very deliberate, heavy footsteps. And it stopped right beside his tent, on the opposite side of where me and my son's tent was. And my first thought was, well, could have been a black bear. But my son had cooked supper for us and earlier that evening, and we had chicken. So we had chicken bones. I know you're not supposed to leave any food out in bear country, but nobody's been attacked by a bear in Oklahoma that I know of. So we just wasn't thinking about it. And he had made some steaks in the skillet. So the cooking grease, leftover stuff was out. Whatever that was that come down there did not touch any of our stuff, food or otherwise. Now, as well as I do, whether it's a raccoon or whether it's a bear, if you've left food out, they're going to go for that.
Yeah.
This walked directly to Cornell's tent and stopped right there outside of it. And he said, and he was terrified. He really, and he'll tell you that. He goes, we looked around, could not see whatever it was. If it was still there, it was safely in the woods watching us from a distance. But I said, well, it's not here now. And he said, well, I'm not sleeping in the tent. And I'm like, well, what are you going to do? He said, I'll sleep in the back seat of your pickup. I said, well, it's full of stuff. He goes, I'll sleep in the front seat of your pickup. I said, okay. And he did. The next morning, I was first one up and got out. And Cornell was setting up in the front passenger seat of my pickup, and his sleeping bag was over his head. And I thought, well, it did get pretty cold. And Cornell, he'll just tell you. If he's scared of something, he'll just say it. He doesn't have any of that fake machismo or whatever you want to call it, And I said, were you cold? I said, were you cold or something? He goes, no. He said, you and Elijah got back in the tent. And he said, I'm looking around in here at all the glass, and I'm just thinking, my God, what if it walks up and looks in the window at me? So he just flat said, he said, and he felt kind of bad because he said, I came all these miles down here, flew down here from Massachusetts for the chance to hopefully see one of these things. And he said, when one might well have been standing outside the tent, all I could do is wish it would go away.
I think a lot of people feel that way.
Yeah, and he was thinking about it. He said, I could have literally stuck my phone through the flap of the tent and snapped a picture. But he said, I was just like, I think the way he put it, he said, I was like the kid hoping the monster doesn't come out of the closet.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, there was that. When he got back home, he started going through the audio recordings, and if you want to hear those recordings, now the first night there, we heard something in the distance like this chattering, but it was so distant we couldn't really make out what it was. But when he got home from the recording from that, he was able to blow it up enough, and it would that first night, that was a couple of raccoons arguing over something in the distance. That's where that recording device he had came in handy, because where we were at, it was so far away we could just faintly hear it. Mm-hmm. But he was able to pull it up on his computer and identify it as raccoons. But if you go to the YouTube channel, the No Such Thing podcast, and just scroll down till you get to where he's analyzing the audio on that, you can hear some of I think he's got some of the wood knocks and a whoop or two on there. So you can hear that there.
Well, where all can people find you on the internet?
Well, with me, it's, of course, on Facebook, it's just David Wilbanks. If you type in that on Facebook, and I'll share on the Facebook page, like pictures I take down in the Kiamichi Mountains, or if I'm going to be on somebody's podcast or whatever. But mainly it's right there. Now you can, on Amazon, type in books by David Wilbanks, and it'll take you to my Amazon page where you can buy either of my books, one called The Champay, Terror Has a Name, which is a fictional story based on a monster in native Choctaw legend. And my most recent book that I just published a couple of months ago is called Kiamichi Bigfoot, Investigating the Oklahoma Sasquatch. I have a YouTube channel called Bigfoot and More, in which I share people's encounters and do video documentation of me going out into the field. And if you have a sighting that you would like to share with me, I would love to read it. And you can contact me at bigfootandmore@yahoo.com. That's bigfootandmore@yahoo.com.
David, I appreciate you coming on and sharing all this information and stories with me and my listeners. I have thoroughly enjoyed it, sir.
Oh, yeah. That was great, man. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. And until next time, remember, there's something in the woods.